Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn. I hope that you're having a good lunch and a good month so far. I am very honored and excited to welcome our guest presenter for today, Nora Hannah, and she is the director of the Arizona Together for Impact Fund. And she's here today to tell us a little bit more about how her experience in supporting nonprofits create long-lasting partnerships and sustainable partnerships, and how she's done so throughout Arizona. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and feel free to eat your lunch. This is going to be very casual, but hopefully interactive. I have a bunch of slides, which I will give you something better to look at and give you more opportunity to eat your lunch while we're doing this. I see my friend Monica in here. Thanks for joining. So I'm going to ask you to, if you have a question or a comment, use the raise your hand button down below, because then you'll come up on my screen. Otherwise, I can't see all of you. So just do that. Interrupt me at any time. This is very informal, very casual. I'm really just hoping to share with you some ideas about how you can collaborate more, what the benefits of collaboration are, what some of the resources are out there, and how to think about some, I think, old things that are being used more in more innovative ways that might be opportunities for you to use for your own collaboration. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the share screen, and we'll take it from there. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that. And again, anytime you want to interrupt me, do it. You probably can do it just by unmuting, which I don't have a problem with. But if you use the little raise your hand button, you'll pop to the top of my screen, and I can make sure you are heard. So Arizona Together for Impact, I will tell you more about it at the end of this, but we essentially support nonprofit collaboration. And the goal is to help nonprofits, have more impact because they have more resources. And I come from a business background, but also having run a nonprofit. And it is very hard to get out of short-term thinking when you're in the nonprofit world. And while funders don't like that, they're part of the problem, because most of our funding is very short-term funding. And so it's really challenging to think long-term, because you don't know what your resources are going to be unless you have some long-term government grant. But even those, I feel like can go away overnight sometimes. And I've had that happen to me. So it's very hard to think long-term. And a lot of the resources that are needed to build the infrastructure of an organization are hard to build for smaller organizations. And I think we all know the data. I think 90% or some number like that of nonprofits are under $1 million. So most of us are pretty small businesses in one form or another. There are only a few that are just behemoths. So if we collaborate more, can we build that infrastructure in the form of a team or a network? And will that help us be more sustainable and financially viable, and give us some more breathing room to not worry about some of these things as we go forward? So I'm going to share with you, when organizations think about collaborating, what their common motivations are, and maybe this will spark some of the opportunities as well. We automatically go to money. Lots of mergers, their collaborations take a lot of different forms, but when it's a merger, it's usually a financially motivated kind of thing. And when we've heard about them a lot, they've been sort of one organization in a desperate situation. That's not the best way to go about thinking about a strategic merger. We really try to get organizations to be thinking about this from a strengths-based perspective, as opposed to anxious about the future perspective. So what can you do to advance the goals of your community and advance, I would say, your vision over your mission? Typically, our mission statements tend to be a little bit internally focused, but vision statements are really community-wide usually. And so If you're focused more on the vision, I think you come at this from more of a strengths-based perspective than mission. And it also often takes the ego out of it. That can be hard when you're, especially when you're dealing with a board who has a lot of ego involved sometimes in these conversations. Programmatic is another way we really encourage collaboration. And there's a lot of reasons to do that right now. Most of the programmatic funding that we do is about scaling. So, you have a program, they have a program. If we put these programs together, we can scale up much more quickly. And you'll have access to bigger funders because they'll support an organization that is multi-state or multi-country or, multi-county even. So programmatic has a lot of benefits to it. When we're looking at this as a funder, we're looking at existing programs that want to, use a shared curriculum or shared resources in order to expand or scale up. And that's not uncommon. And I don't think people are coming to us as often as they could be for those kinds of opportunities. And then these are the other two that I think are really important to be thinking about, particularly succession planning. It's a great time. I think all of us, whether you're in nonprofit or for-profit, are dealing with issues of staffing. We supported a merger, a very well-known one, between the Boys and Girls Clubs of the East Valley and Metro Phoenix. But what came out of it is a lot of managers of both organizations got bigger portfolios, and they were able to manage, a lot of change, particularly during COVID, with resources of both organizations. And it's not easy to integrate staff. I'm not going to make light of that, but in today's market, it would be far better to merge a program or an organization as a staffing solution as well, because we're all struggling to get really talented people who know how to manage the programs that we have. In the succession planning part of talent recruiting, particularly with smaller organizations, and I went through this personally when I transitioned out of my nonprofit, it's really hard to find someone who cares about it as much as you do. And unless you have a fairly substantive organization, most times what you have is a really great program. And it's a great time to be thinking about, is there an umbrella that program can go under to make sure that it's sustainable? I often tell the story of when I decided to leave my nonprofit, and I gave them, 8 months of runway and all that sort of stuff. One of my friends who was also a funder came up to me, and the first thing she said to me is, "You should merge." And I was so offended. I was, what do you think we're not good enough? We're not big enough. I haven't managed it well. I took it very personally. And had she approached me and said, "Listen, what you've created here is hugely valuable, and I'm not sure anyone's going to love it as much as you do, but in order for it to be sustainable, it's going to need infrastructure." And I think thinking about collaborating with a larger organization may be a way to ensure that this great program keeps going. Well, that would have been a totally different message to me. And so I really like to be thoughtful about how the word merger or integration is used. It's kind of taboo in nonprofit sectors. In for-profit sector, you bring it up all the time. It's a plus sign. And so it's interesting how different it is between the two sectors. But I do think, and I have a colleague in Los Angeles who's running a program. She also funds collaboration. They're doing one to fund executive transitions, and they're bringing in board chairs, outgoing executives, and incoming executives as cohorts. Very interesting program, but it is a tough transition moment for any organization. And they did a survey in Los Angeles. I don't have this data for Arizona, of the nonprofits in their community, and fully 1/4 of them expected to have an executive transition in the next 12 to 18 months. That's a lot. So be thinking about that. Infrastructure investments. I was just on a call this morning with a group that has a facility They serve a particular community with a disability, but they have a very large healthcare nonprofit that wants to come into their facility and serve the entire community in which this organization resides, which would be not only helpful to their population, but to broader populations as well. So it's a really great example of the kind of infrastructure collaborations that I think make a big difference across a lot of different lines. So that's another one to think about is how could we share kind of back office and physical office space, particularly now that that has all changed and none of us need as much space as we thought we once did. So those are some of the things to think about in terms of why. I'm going to share a little bit of data that came from Bridgespan Group. This is how they define the different types of collaborations. We actually fund all of these in one form or another. We like to be on the front end of this. So we like to be sparking new associations, new joint programs, et cetera. That if you have one that's been, a partnership for 5 years, that's probably not something that at least my initiative funds. But if you're thinking about starting one of these, I would love to have a conversation. Associations, I would consider that kind of what you are, a network. And I want to talk more about networks in a few minutes, but I think this is a very interesting area. The one thing that you may or may not have is a formal agreement, and that would be required for us, but you're really trying to accomplish shared goals, and those goals can vary widely. And as I talk about networks, you'll see how different they all are. Joint programs, I kind of touched on. Generally, that's about scale. More than anything else, I find that's the impetus behind a joint program model. Occasionally, it's about staffing. Shared support is the instance I just went through of maybe a building, maybe HR, IT. You can even do it just by way of a contract with another organization. It doesn't have to be any kind of, more formal integration than that. And again, in all three of these, nothing changes about your governance model. In a merger, and there are lots of different forms that a merger can take place. Generally, the key difference is your governance is merging in one form or another. Sometimes you keep a separate board of directors for a number of years. Sometimes you have sort of a parent subsidiary models. There's all different ways this can go. And you can do it in phases, and you can do it in a way that you can unwind it if it's not working. And I'll talk about what gets in the way of making it work, because there are obstacles to this. It is not just as simple as having lunch with a colleague and saying, hey, let's figure out how to partner. There's a lot of work to be done. And it's one of the reasons that Arizona Together for Impact funds consultants to take organizations through this work. This is the data from Bridgespan, which I thought was really interesting, like how much collaboration is already happening. And they were pretty comprehensive here. Let's see, 237 nonprofit CEOs talked about which of these they had considered or participated in. So a lot of people considered that they had done joint programs with another organization. And most of us, I think more informal than formal, are members of an association. Some of those are very formal associations, but a lot of them are less formal. You can see it really goes down dramatically when it gets into shared support or mergers and how many people had worked in that area. This is what I thought was interesting is, so they not only surveyed nonprofit CEOs, they surveyed foundations who support nonprofits and give grants. And what you're seeing here is how many do this kind of work. That's kind of the red line. So when you see that red line on associations, it's sort of just under 60, say 60% say, yeah, we do. I'm a member of an association. And then the 50 line, the gray bar, is how many funders would like to fund that. About 50% of funders say we would like to support associations. So taking that across the board, joint programs, pretty even. But it really, the rubber hits the road on shared support services and mergers. Everyone wants to do more of them, but they're not happening. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, the one I brought up earlier, I think culturally, it feels like failure. If I couldn't do it on my own, then what's wrong with me? And I think COVID actually helped this. We were all sort of in it together when COVID hit, and the idea of contacting a peer and saying, I need help, or what are you doing about this, was a lot easier than maybe before showing your vulnerability to your funder or a colleague or, a group of colleagues. And I think in the merger space, there's been a lot of fear. A lot of education needs to take place, not only with executives and board members, but with funders. I would have had a real fear of going to a funder in the throes of talking about a merger, because I would be fearful that they wouldn't give me the funding. They'd want to wait and see what happened. And so I think when we're in those conversations, we tend to hold it close to the vest. So we're trying to change that. I run a national network with my colleague in Los Angeles around this whole funding for collaboration. And we're really trying to change the way philanthropy thinks about mergers and shared services as a strengths base. Like, if you have an organization talking about that, you should be supporting them, because they're clearly thinking strategically, and that's the kind of organization you want to put your money behind. So we have more work to do, but that's changing. If you go to our website, you'll see, like, I think I have 22 or 23 funders at the table from Arizona. It's all the usual suspects, including corporations. So they're all meeting with me every month and hearing what I have to say about this. So hopefully it's changing the way they're responding as well to this. This was another interesting piece that I think will come up for all of us. This was the survey when they went to nonprofits and CEOs. What are your barriers to having a collaboration? And I find that number one barrier fairly common. I get a lot of phone calls saying, I would really like to partner, merge, whatever. I don't know who to talk to. And so we started a program. It's the first one nationally with a seed grant to help you get a consultant that helps you find a partner. So, how to do the environmental scan, how to figure out who is in this area, et cetera, because unlike opening a coffee shop where you could see who else your competition was by driving down the street, or going online because you wanted to find out, who's doing what. In nonprofit, it's very hard to see who's adjacent to you, like who else at this school is offering programs. You may not know, it's not obvious. So it's more challenging. What I think is interesting is this. Everyone agrees that the cultural integration and dividing partnership roles is important. Funders think, how hard is this to find a partner? Because they're getting hit up by everyone. And so, new organization comes in and says, I want to provide these services to this particular community. And they're like, yeah, have you talked to these 7 other organizations that are already doing that? So they see that all the time. We don't. Like, it's very hard to find who's adjacent to you, which is why I love this network idea and the idea of what you all are doing by meeting together, because that's how you learn about this stuff. I have a group of colleagues and they're the ones who fill me in on, everything that's happening that I may not have heard about otherwise. So I thought this delta was one of the most telling about what's happening in the marketplace around this. So let's talk a little bit about networks. And I don't know if you all can see me, but I met this gal recently online, obviously, who wrote this book about networks. And I've become this evangelist, and I'm really trying to get Arizona Together for Impact to fund more networks, and the start of these networks, because I think this is how you build relationships, build trust, find out who's adjacent to you, share best practices, et cetera. And if you have that network, the next step of doing a collaboration becomes so much easier because you've had a year of meeting together once a month, or talking about issues together, or sharing resources together. So it makes a huge difference. What I didn't understand is how different networks are from each other. So again, I came into this thinking, how do I help everyone else? And then after I met this gal virtually, I'm like, wait a minute, I run a network and we're not doing it right. So I needed her for me, much less to support other organizations that I am working with. So these are the 6 definitions. She comes out of Northwestern, obviously done all this research. And this book is not a page turner. I need to warn you, it's very academic, but it's, you can go to the right place and find what you need out of it, which is what I was going for. These are the different types of networks, and you really have to figure out, like, where are you in this? What is your network about? And I thought I knew. And, for ours, the Sustained Collaboration Network, I know exactly what we are. We're learning based, and this is what we're all about, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we ended up hiring her to help us work through the building of this network, because we're fairly new. It's only really been around as a network for a year or two, very informally managed by, a volunteer who did it in addition to 4 other jobs that she had. And so we didn't really have a lot of structure to it. So we hired Michelle, and she's taking us through the next steps on this. We've only had our first meeting. But the next step in all of this is to create the theory of change, which I had never heard of until I moved into the nonprofit sector. But she goes through, 5 of them are here, what your theory of change would focus on, depending on the nature of your network, and how you have to have this as the bedrock for your network to progress. So I'm going to go out to all of you, and maybe I'm going to put this on Anna a little bit, is what would you say your network is of all of these?
That's a great question. I think it's a mix. I don't see it clearly as one or the other, but systems alignment sounds like maybe the larger chunk. And maybe learning, because we're learning from each other and sharing with each other.
Interesting. Does anyone else want to chime in? Go for it.
Do you think that we would be also, that our network is maybe a catalyst, because we're maybe scaling or networking like some of the solutions that we see in one location into another, that we're sharing some of those best practices, or share some of what we're seeing in other locations that we've seen, I'm not sure. Again, brand new, asking questions.
That's a great question. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of potential for that, because we do overlap in so much of what we do across the organizations that are members. So that's why it was a little hard for me to just pick one, because there's like little bits of all of them, I think.
Well, I can totally relate. Again, we just had our first session for going through our theory of change for the Sustained Collaboration Network. And there were probably a dozen of us, who are all managers of different funds throughout the country, going through this. And she took us through this process, and it was excellent, but it was very interesting that when you do have to pick your primary audience and what you want to do, and doing that means you leave something behind. So I felt the same way. I think that Anna did, is like, well, I think we're catalyst and we're learning, and she's like, yeah, no. And, she had a very good process for this, but it was a great discussion. I'm just going to take you to this: support, inspiration, and resources for organizations and individuals. I really felt like, boy, you're more in a learning network. I think you become catalytic when you figure out all the systems you want to implement. Catalytic, the way I understood it, and again, I'm a neophyte in this area. I still have to keep the book on my nightstand, so I understand what's happening. But it is really about we have a system, we have a theory of change, we have a program model. We've all agreed to it. We all measure it the same way, and now we're going to try and broaden the reach of it across borders, communities. Pick your geography. So I just would encourage, to spend a little time with this. And you can pick out some pieces. She's got her name is Michelle Shoemate, Shumate. She's got some resources online, some videos online. I'll warn you, the videos are a little dry, but she's much better in the facilitation. But the videos are like, you will need your lunch there as well, because you really have to, but she's so smart and she gets right to it. She knows her stuff really, really well. So as you think about your own network, I think that's a part of this. And one of the things that Anna and I were talking about early on is, your network is new. How do you grow it, bring it forward, make sure everyone's getting the benefit out of it? I think it's really important to have a facilitator. And I know that's really hard because you don't have resources. So perhaps there's granting that can be done to help build the network. But I do think that a facilitator can help a network get launched and figure out their theory of change and that sort of thing. I'm in a couple of different networks and we are now self-directed, but we started off with a facilitator that helped us get to where you want to go. And a facilitator can help with recruitment and onboarding and any early conflicts, because everyone will not agree on this theory of change. Trust me on that. It was a really interesting process, and we're all super friendly in ours. But at some point, you want to figure out what's the accountability of everyone in the network, and it's much easier to have a facilitator who is, doesn't have a dog in the fight, if you will, to help you agree and hold everyone accountable. Anna, are you keeping an eye on the chat? Because I am not.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so if you need to interrupt me, do it.
Will do.
And then, I think you can shift from facilitated to self-directed very comfortably. I'm in a group, I'm on the third bullet now, off-board facilitator. I'm in a group that has been meeting together. It's a for-profit business leaders group. We had a facilitator for years, then we've been self-directed. And we just decided yesterday to bring in a facilitator again. Because we just felt like, well, boy, we need something fresh. We need a fresh perspective. We need to bring that accountability back up that we kind of let falter because we weren't holding each other accountable as much. And so we're now looking for a facilitator. And again, seriously, 15 years, I think we've been together. So, it's not just a simple answer. It's very healthy to every year or two say, are we getting out of this what we need and what would be great for us to move forward as a part of this? And then my latest thing is fiscal sponsorship. And I had a couple of calls earlier this week on this topic, and I have a whole new appreciation for how this could fit into collaboration. And I am guessing, although I don't know this, because so much of your work is international and you have so many internationals, that often means there are tiny little organizations and communities that need some help, right? An NGO of some sort. And that doesn't mean it has to be international, it could be local, but you are in a lot of, as we can see in the picture, rural communities that have programs. They certainly don't want to start a nonprofit. And this whole idea of fiscal sponsorship, it turns out there's new research on it, and that it saves up to 30% of the costs of operating a nonprofit. And as someone I was started in my previous career under a fiscal sponsorship for several years. And it was through the Arizona Community Foundation, which doesn't want you to stay as a fiscal sponsor. They want you to do this to test it out. And it was great. And by then I had funders, I'd built a brand, I had a program model, et cetera. So fine. We went ahead and did our 1023 and became a, freestanding 501c3. But the idea, I had a call the other day of a pretty substantive nonprofit here in Arizona who's been approached because there's a small community program and they want to keep going, but they don't know if they want to become an independent nonprofit or not. And she called me to say, boy, what would it take for us to be their fiscal sponsor? Of course, I didn't have an answer, but I went and got one. And met with these people who do it nationally. I found a consultant in LA who works with smaller organizations on setting up fiscal sponsorship. I just think and they were also pretty convincing that it doesn't have to be just a startup plan. You can stay under fiscal sponsorship indefinitely, and allows you to have your own board, your own management, a lot of autonomy. And I think that's particularly needed in the area of equity. These little organizations are often serving small communities, rural communities, and communities of color. And to be absorbed by a large organization, which is unlikely to be led by BIPOC individuals or have a history of serving communities of color, this is a way they can maintain their autonomy, but still have the infrastructure that comes from a larger organization. And so I'm really kind of, and I'm new to it, but I'm very turned on by this opportunity to use fiscal sponsorship as a way. I'm going to put up a slide that's hideous. So I just want you to know that I know it's hideous. See how bad it is. But I really wanted to get this information, and I'll share the link to it. And it turns out that this comes from the Forbes Fund, and the Forbes Fund is part of the Sustained Collaboration Network. So I'm like, I'm going back to you people because you know about this. So apparently down the left, there are, 6 models of fiscal sponsorship. And these people on the phone were so far out of my league. They were saying, oh, the A model, the C model. I'd never heard of any of this. But it really is about, boy, do you just have an independent contractor that you want to do a project on? And do you set up a fiscal sponsorship for that? Are you a supporting organization? You can have your own 501c3 and still be under fiscal sponsorship. So there was just a whole plethora of ways that this could help a particularly small, I think, community-based organizations run their program, have some autonomy, but be part of a larger infrastructure without having to go through all the compliance that's required. Again, I when I was in the for-profit world, I ran a company that was about $8 to $10 million. And I never had to have an audit. I didn't have to write reports. It was incredible that, but having a $1 million nonprofit, the compliance was ridiculous. I mean, everything I had to do and report. And so this is a way, it may not eliminate all the complexity, but this is a way to, I think, simplify some of those processes moving forward. So I think it's worth considering. There's apparently a book on this. There's only one. I've ordered it. I don't have it yet. But there is a book that talks specifically about fiscal sponsorship. And it is something that I would be interested in having Arizona Together for Impact Fund. So if you had a small community-based organization that wanted to, grow and become part of your organization, I think this is something, I'd be willing to present. I'm going to go quickly through some last pieces. Some of this is not going to be stuff you don't know. These sorts of partnerships are not about IT or financial systems. That's the easy part. It's cultural. It's all cultural. It's all about trust. It's all about exploring what the cultural aspects are, the different organizations are. I had 2 organizations recently who I funded, and there's no reason they shouldn't have merged in terms of what they do, who they serve, who's on their board, everything like that. But they operated totally differently. One operated as a professional organization with staff, one was all volunteer. And yeah, the merger didn't go. Am I cutting out?
It's a little laggy, but
Yeah.
you're okay.
Okay, because I can see my face is getting pixelated. We don't want to have happen. Anyway, so we fund consultants to help you explore a lot of these issues on the cultural identity and how that's going to operate moving forward. That gets skipped. Board members are typically focused on what's the financial future, what does that look like, you know, how are we going to integrate our databases. Roadblocks, you know, this is where I think fiscal sponsorship falls in. You can have a lot of autonomy under a fiscal sponsorship. I love that. Trust is what it's all about, which is why networks are so helpful. Self-interest is, you know, board members say, we want to keep this ours. We don't want other people in our stuff, whatever that looks like, or staff members. Doesn't have to be board members. And then the organizational culture is another roadblock. You know, these are all the ways that it's helpful. It's much easier to do this when you're not in crisis. I'm looking at this one over here. Great to have these conversations. Again, we don't care where the conversation goes. We just fund you to have the conversation. I tried to do a merger one time and I felt like the missions were different, but there was flexibility in rewriting missions. So I think you have to have an open mind about those sorts of things, like think in a much broader way. And again, trust is, I think, just probably the single biggest factor in all of this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Arizona Together for Impact, and then we can open up for any conversation that you want to have. Essentially, we support and fund the creation and implementation. So we like to be catalytic. We like to help organizations when they're first thinking about these things. We like to support even finding a partner. And then once you get to the point of an agreement with the I's dotted and T's crossed, we often fund the implementation phase. So we offer multiple grants, and it's not a one-time deal. You can come back with different opportunities. Here's how we work. I'll go through this pretty quickly. I've already talked about the kinds of things we fund, but the type of grants, a seed grant is the one where I know we need to do a merger. I run a small program. I started it 30 years ago. Now I want to retire and I need to find a home for my wonderful program. That's a common call that I get. There are other ones, but how do I find that parent nonprofit that would want this? So the seed grant is really just helping the executive and the board figure out how to find the right partner and identifying what the right partner would look like. Exploration grant, that's kind of our sweet spot. It's also called a negotiation grant in other circles. It is, boy, we have a group we'd like to work with, or two or three or four. And what we fund in this is a facilitator to help you go through the 6, 9, 12-month process of, could we really do this? And it could be a program integration, shared services, merger, it could be any of those. But the facilitator helps the organizations get through this process. And the third one is very just the facts, ma'am. We've agreed to this. Our boards have agreed to this. We've signed the agreement. We need an HR person to come in and help put together our 2 sets of personnel policies. And we need a tech person to integrate our databases. Like, it's hardwired cost of integrating. In all cases, what we fund is the third party. We don't fund any internal costs. And typically we fund, with the exception of the seed grant, that's sort of a fixed amount. In exploration and implementation, typically we fund up to 50% of the costs. I do have partners who sometimes provide the match. Often the match comes from internal resources or other funders, but I was just on the phone prior to this with a healthcare funder. So if I have someone in the healthcare, we did 2 behavioral health organizations, their foundation would be a good partner for matching some of those resources. So I try to help find other partners to meet that match. And sometimes they go from A to B to C. They do a seed grant, they find a partner, they do an exploration grant, they decide to do it, and then we fund the implementation grant. So they go step by step by step. And at any step other than implementation, if you decide this didn't work, no problem. We're here to help you explore, not necessarily, we're not pushing an integration. So that's not the goal. The goal is to get people talking about it and change the way they think about it. This is quick. This is actually from National. This is about why you need a consultant. And essentially, they make these conversations go much more smoothly, even when you walk away. Like, feelings don't get hurt when you have a consultant. Obstacles are overcome when you have a consultant. Like, they can sort of calm everyone down, talk rationally. It's very hard to hear it from your, potential partner. It's not too hard to hear from someone who is an objective third party saying, I think you need to let this one go. So it's helpful to have that in the room, which is why that's the biggest, our impetus on funding that resource, because most organizations don't have the resource. And we do have an amazing cadre of consultants in Arizona that do this work of all kinds, and they can support this work. And of course, you could do it with consultants who are not necessarily here in town. This kind of goes through the phases. Readiness, feasibility, that's your seed grant. Exploration grant is the negotiation. And the implementation grant is about the actual, rubber hitting the road. And I'm not hard to find. So don't worry about that. You can find me anytime. And I'm going to go back to stop sharing now so I can see you all. Any questions, ideas, thoughts, things you wish I'd talked about?
While people build up the courage to ask a question, I did want to mention, I learned a ton, and I'm so excited to dig in a little bit more into this business of networks, because as with most things in nonprofit, we kind of jumped into this with a good intention and a hope that something good would come out, not necessarily with the formal training to do it in a certain way, right? So these resources that you presented, even just the theory of change for each of them, I'm just like, wow. I'm excited to learn more about them and see how we can implement them for AGDN specifically.
Yeah, I think the book is helpful on that. But I think if you go to her website, Michelle's, she's got some resources online that'll get you started. That'll be easier and free. And I have several local consultants who are good at that theory of change work.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Nora, I do have just a quick question for you. I sit in on the Alliance Nonprofit Public Policy Council meetings. And so I'm just wondering how AZ Together for Impact kind of has a hand in public policy, or do you guys have a public policy agenda? I just was curious in terms of pushing the needle in terms of anything regarding public policy.
No, we don't specifically have any public policy agenda. However, if there was a network forming that was public, because we're sort of agnostic as to the type of organization we fund or the goal. And sometimes it's hard to keep the funders out of the weeds on that one. I'm going to just own that. They could do this a different way. Yeah, that's not the point. They're talking about it. They're doing it. That's all we care about. Let it go. So if there were a public policy network or collaboration, I think we could support it if it was a startup, as I talked about.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I did, I will share that we did get a grant proposal from Esperanza and I submitted it. And it was with a partnership that was out of the United States, and the funds were really going largely outside of the United States. And the funders said, yeah, we need the services to mostly be in Arizona. So it was one of my few failures. I was very disappointed that I couldn't push that one through. But that's not to say that there aren't other opportunities, particularly if the focus is largely Arizona based. And I get it, that's where these funders' money is intended to go. So that makes sense to me. But I was disappointed because I think more and more issues are going to cross a lot of geographic boundaries, particularly when you look at things like environmental issues and, like there's no way you're going to be able to keep this to a certain geography. And I did have another request from, I think, Sierra Club for something very similar. It was a border-based initiative, but it was really more about Mexico than it was about Arizona. So I'm working on it. I'll just say that.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I may have missed it. Did you give a range of what the amounts that you'll fund?
No, you didn't miss it. I do. The seed grant is only $2,500. That's a fixed amount. The other grants range widely. And historically, the exploration grant has ranged anywhere from, and again, this is 50% of the cost, 5 to about 25,000 or 30,000. The implementation grant has even a wider range because if it's a huge implementation, obviously a large organization, it's going to be complex. So those have been more in the 15 to 70 or $75,000 range for the implementation grant. Very few up at the top end, but big organizations merging requires a lot of money, and we're usually a small part of it, but we definitely want to support those.
And do you fund, you mentioned infrastructure, which I know most often means things. Would that also be like software or things like that?
Yeah.
That type of information? Because I know that, and again, I'm brand new, so I know, but some initiatives about like collecting data is, important. So as we've just merged with, the organization south of the border, but with all of our partners around that, I know probably collecting data and some of that we would be this probably the center of the hub to do that and help them create that. So maybe speaks to that.
Yeah, I think that would be a great collaboration. I often use one as an example that existed before Arizona Together for Impact did, which is 3 nonprofits in Coconino County, Flagstaff area, who were all in different aspects of homelessness service. And they decided to come together and create a common database that they could all share. So it was a big trust issue because, they're going to see everything about each other, but it really served clients in a positive way because they were all dealing with the same clients and they needed to know the histories, right? So that, I think that's an ideal collaboration. I would definitely propose something like that. So if you have, again, a genuine collaboration where they're going to share a resource, I think that's something we would look at for sure.
And then I just have one more and I'll be quiet.
No.
What about like capacity building? So I know that part of what we're looking at, really with any of our partners that we work with, but capacity building, and that they may have supporters or donors that are here in Arizona or throughout the United States, but they just haven't been able to really tap that. And so we're looking at how we can grow the the fundraising or the communication or our digital marketing towards everybody. So I didn't know if that would be part of anything that might.
I think that's a possibility. On that one slide, it does talk about fundraising, joint fundraising. I don't think if you were just applying for one grant together, but if there was some way you were all going on e-tapestry or, figuring out how there was going to be a sustained, I think that's the key to it. Is it a sustained collaboration? Are you just going after a grant together? Probably not. But if you're coming together for a long-term solution that you're going to be working together on over multiple years, then I think regardless of the subject matter, that would be something we'd consider.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been very informative.
Yeah, good. Well, I hope it sparks some ideas. And you can feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions. And again, I'm pretty easy to find, but Anna has my email, so we can go from there. And you've got 4 minutes left. Boy, I didn't even time it. That worked out pretty well. Well, nice to meet you all. Good luck. If there's anything I can be helpful with, please feel free to contact me.
Thank you so much, Nora. This has been
You
great.
bet.
I know I've learned a ton, and I'm sure everyone here and everyone who watches the recording afterward will also be grateful, and we'll be sure to stay in contact. So thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.